Hi folks, I'm Mike Medea, Head of Education Programs at the American Philosophical Society, or the APS. Haven't watched one of our career chats yet? That's okay. If you have, thanks for being part of our community. If you need a quick introduction to the APS though, be sure to check out our website or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, we're here to discuss the many careers offered by an organization like the APS. As a museum, research library, archive, and membership society, we have great staff who do work ranging from administration to publications. Career Chats showcases these staff members and introduces you to careers you might not have considered before. I ask the staff members a series of questions during these interviews. If you've seen the page for the series and have a question about a certain career, be sure to submit one. We'd love to hear from you. Now that you have some basics, enjoy learning about APS staff and their careers. Folks, and thanks for joining us on this final episode of Career Chat Season 2. Somehow we've made it all the way to the end of this season. I am delighted and honored to be joined by Marilyn Vignola, Special Assistant to the Executive Officer at the APS. How are you doing today, Marilyn?
Very well, Michael. Thank you. How are you?
Not too shabby today. So if you wouldn't mind just restating your name and your title.
Sure. Marilyn Vignola, Special Assistant to the Executive Officer at the American Philosophical Society.
So what do you get to do, Marilyn?
Well, I am the assistant to the executive officer, which is the highest in-house position at the American Philosophical Society. We have a president who is off-site. The executive officer oversees the day-to-day activities of the society, and I assist him in scheduling meetings, phone calls, events, doing emails for him as he requests, letters, making phone calls, attend meetings, take minutes. It's an organizational position, Michael.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. And it sounds like you have to have a good balance between a bird's eye view and a kind of granular view of things too at the same time. So it's kind of an odd question, especially of that description, but would you say your work tends to be solo or as a team?
We're very much a team. The executive officer and I work very closely together. He oversees the day-to-day operations. He has a vision for where he wants the society to go, and we run with it. Each executive officer has a different vision. After 20 years and 5 executive officers, I say I have had 5 jobs all at the same desk.
And it's so great. So I get you've been with the APS for 20 years. So congratulations.
20 years. It's been a while.
And I also love the description that you've had 5 different jobs at the same desk, because that would definitely change, especially your position based on who that executive officer is.
Yes, definitely.
So what did you do before working at the APS?
Before coming to the APS, I started my career right out of college in New York City as a receptionist for an employment agency. From there, I went into book publishing, academic books, and then business books. Then I moved to Philadelphia, and I was an executive secretary for a insurance brokerage firm. From there, I came to the APS.
Great. So it sounds like you kind of learned about this type of work on the job, but could you elaborate on how you first kind of heard about this field of work?
Sure. My mother was actually a traditional secretary, and she went to Pierce when it was a business school, Pierce Business School in Philadelphia. And my father had his own business, so she was his secretary for the business, but working from home. So I kind of saw the job in action from an early age. And from an early age, I also started answering phones and taking messages. So yeah, I was initiated young.
That's so great. And it's fun to kind of have that family connection too, right? That you get to like kind of ground it in that early learning.
Yes.
So what are the education and experience expectations for your job?
I don't believe you need a bachelor's, but I think it's really important to have a bachelor's degree, especially when you work at a place like the American Philosophical Society. We have intelligent members and intelligent staff. You want to be able to carry on conversation with them and just have good rapport. So I would say for this position, a liberal arts education gives you a good broad base.
Yeah, and that's such a helpful tip to have too, right?
Yeah.
Where if you think about an organization like the APS or interested in an organization like the APS, you kind of need to know what you're getting yourself into.
Definitely.
Being able to fit that organizational culture is pretty important, where the skills of your position you might not learn by getting a BA, but you learn how to kind of deal with the organization itself by,
Yes,
by having that, which
definitely.
is such a good thing, right? Like that's a major thing to know. So it's great. So what would you say are the pros and cons of your job?
It's nice work. It's enjoyable environment. It's my colleagues are pleasant. I could say you have to be satisfied not to be in the limelight. Doing your job should have its own satisfaction, and you have to be okay with few accolades. Because the upfront person is usually the one who gets the accolades. You are working behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a really good thing to know too, right? Where like if you think, or if you pause to think about the job itself and you read the job description, you might have to ask yourself, do I want to be in the limelight or do I not want to be in the limelight? And does that fit,
Right.
who I am? It's a good like small point that I don't think it's come up in another conversation. So that's great for your viewers to know. So how do you see your field changing in the next 10 years?
Whoa. Change is huge in this field. When I first started, it was a very traditional position, stenography, typing, filing. The technology has impacted it greatly. People no longer take stenography. We just had our APS meeting and we had closed captioning of everything that went on. So we have actually, there'll be a written script of the meeting, but you have to be able to move with the technology. You have to be able to adapt to your job as it changes. I don't know generally what this position will be in 10 years, but perhaps at the executive level, there'll still be administrative assistant positions. We'll see. I'm not sure.
There are like about 15 different kernels of wisdom and knowledge within that within that answer. So I'm only going to try to pick some of them. But I think your points about adapting and changing, one in general, massively important, right? Where even if you think back to your earlier response of you had 5 different jobs at the same desk, that's a form of adapting and changing over time. But also matching technology is such a massively important thing that might be small, where even the executive officers can have different technology preferences. Who knows,
Yes.
right? And being able to adapt and learn those technologies as you go along is a huge thing in and of itself. So those are fantastically helpful answers to think about for our viewers as well. So we're going to transition to the second section of the, of the conversation into Maryland of yesteryear. So what did you say you were like in high school?
High school, okay. Shy, quiet, shouldering the problems of the world. I was asking the big questions like, if there is a good God, why cancer? And I guess that question kind of catapulted me into thinking I'd like to go into medical research. From there, I went to college. As a freshman, I had a come to Christ moment, which kind of lifted that heaviness and the problems of the world, and I no longer felt internally bankrupt. So I started to rethink the career trajectory, and I was asking myself, what are my giftings? What are my strengths? And a feisty old lady at my church, I remember this story, happened somewhere in that high school, college period of time. Feisty old lady at my church who observed me teaching the children, and she told me, I remember where I was standing at the time, and she just said to me, you have a gift of teaching, you should teach. And I think it's important, Michael, that people have the voice of someone older, someone experienced, someone wiser, to speak into them and to know where your strengths lie and to work from your strengths. I feel that's important. So I knew I wanted to teach, but then I thought, well, what do I want to teach? And my love was art. Art was with me from an early age, and I was moderately good at it. And I said, I think I would like to become an art teacher. So I started to pursue that.
Again, there's so much to unpack in that. That's so helpful to think about. Where if you think back to like, right, so you mentioned shouldering the burdens of the world, which is powerful in and of itself, but then also thinking how that connects to something like empathy. And if you're a very empathetic person, it works well for this kind of position where you need to work extremely well and extremely closely with one other individual. So being able to do that well, it's a good thing to kind of like know about yourself and know that it would apply to a position like this. But also I'm a huge proponent of mentorships and like listening to other people. So I think that that point of
Absolutely.
like, you might just need somebody else to tell you what they think your skills are and hear it from them instead. And that's, like you said, it's extremely powerful, and it leads to those memories of like, you remember exactly where you were standing for that conversation.
Yes. Yeah, it just resonated immediately when she said it. It was like, yes, that's true. And I love doing it. And I think I can do it well. It just kind of brought all those thoughts together.
Mm-hmm.
Having someone verbalize it was powerful.
Yeah, the serendipitous moments are really powerful and helpful in the long term. So you mentioned going to undergraduate for an art teaching degree. How would you describe yourself in undergrad, and is this what you thought you'd be doing when you were in undergrad?
Oh, I had no idea that this is what I would be doing. When I was in high school, my mother said, there are two things that you absolutely have to take before you leave high school, and one is typing and one is stenography. So she said, you will always be able to work, which was true back then. Of course, you know, that's long old and outdated, but it was true then. And, you know, I did it.
And it's so great too. Like, so even asking like basically what the essential skills are that you might need long term, and focusing on those things is still helpful in the long run.
It
like,
is.
We all know that now we need to be familiar with things like video conferencing and other smaller forms of technology.
Yes.
Like figuring out what those are is pretty helpful. So what would you say your aha moment was with this kind of career trajectory?
I don't think there was an aha moment. I needed to work. I graduated from college as an art teacher. There were few teaching positions at the time. But the per credit price had jumped dramatically, and I knew I couldn't do that. I had to work. So I took my portfolio and I was still living in New York at the time, walked down Madison Avenue, just cold calls, went into advertising agencies and say, I'm looking for a job. This is my portfolio. Do you have any position open that I could fill? Many of the people who would do the hiring wouldn't take time to even talk with me. I wouldn't get past a receptionist. But a few people did talk to me, and one particular man was very helpful, and he told me, okay, you need to kind of work on your portfolio a little bit. And he told me what I needed to do, and I left, and I thought to myself, do I want to spend my life in advertising? When I'm old and look back, is this what I want to be said about my life? And I said, no, that's not the statement I want to make. So I nixed that whole idea. And I went and heard about an employment agency, and that's when I started with the employment agency. I walked in there looking for a job, and they needed somebody in-house.
Great, and that's a fun full circle
kind of thing,
right? But within that too, I think there's a good trend in the stories you've been telling here of reflection. And there's a couple of moments where you've asked yourself a question and you've had to answer it for yourself, and always being able to like know when you need to ask yourself these questions is an important part of thinking about a career too.
Being attuned to your own inner questions is really important.
Right, definitely. And there's also a good thread of tenacity and grit within that, where I can think of few people today who would be willing to just tromp down Madison Avenue with with a portfolio and deal with that kind of with that situation. So there's a good thing in there too, where like those moments of tenacity and grit will lead to reflection, hopefully, about what those moments are too. So it's a powerful thing to have. And somehow, some way, we've made it to our last question of the day. So if, say, I were a student doing an informational interview with you, are there questions that you love being asked about your job? Any questions that I should avoid? Do you have any kind of pet peeves or things that you really like about informational interviews?
No questions I don't like being asked. I think an important question is, what personal qualities make for success in this position? And good communication is one. You have to be able to understand and communicate well with the executive officer, but you also have to be accessible to your colleagues. You need to have to be caring about them. You're a gatekeeper for your boss. You have to know when to take something to the boss and then when to solve it yourself. I've had colleagues who come to my desk feeling misunderstood, frustrated, and angry. And how can I be a peacemaker in situations? How can I diffuse somebody who's upset? There's also a degree of confidentiality. When somebody comes to you with those emotions and talks about situations, you would have to know that that is confidential. You have to keep it that way. Also, you're privy to information. It goes by your desk. That needs to be kept confidential. So I think all those qualities, Michael, help to make for success.
Yeah, I would definitely say so too. Where I chuckled to myself, where as soon as you were about to say gatekeeper, I jotted down gatekeeper. Because that's an important part of the job, and thinking about that too, about how you have to balance these roles of being the administrative side of things, but then there's like a bizarre HR quality to the position where you have to be able to deal with those coworkers, figure out what needs to get passed on, what doesn't need to get passed on. And my goodness, the confidentiality point is really great to know. So low-key, viewers, if you find yourself to be somebody who can't keep many secrets, I would say think about maybe a different position, because it's good to have confidentiality as an executive assistant in particular, overall. So thank you so much, Marilyn. I think that's where we'll wrap things up for today. It was delightful hearing about your story. And again, I'm always a sucker for mentorship and reflection. So being able to talk about those two things today is pretty great.
Thank you.
So thank you again, everybody, for viewing with Career Chats and joining us today. This is the last episode of season 2. We'll be sure to launch a new season shortly. Remember to check out the page for more resources. Thanks from the APS.